The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, which was the same day Bryce Callahan's truck broke down on Route 9, and his daughter asked him why they never went to nice restaurants anymore. He didn't answer her right away. He was reading the card again, turning it over in his hands like it might say something different the second time. Cream paper, gold-embossed letters, the kind of stationery that costs more than his weekly groceries. You are cordially invited to celebrate the marriage of Serena Whitmore and Frederick Langston. And then handwritten at the bottom in ink he recognized, looping slightly backward on the L's. Hope you can make it, Bryce. It would mean so much. No, it wouldn't. He knew that. He knew exactly what it meant, and it wasn't that. His daughter, Mia, was 6 years old and eating cereal at the kitchen counter with her legs dangling off the bar stool, watching him the way kids watch adults when they sense something is wrong but don't have the language for it yet. She had his brown eyes and her mother's stubborn jaw, and right now she was frowning at him with that jaw set hard. "Daddy, I asked you something." "I know, sweetheart." He folded the invitation and put it in the kitchen drawer under the takeout menus. "We'll go somewhere nice this weekend. I promise." She considered this. Then she went back to her cereal. He stood there a moment longer, hand still resting on the closed drawer, thinking about Serena Whitmore and what she had looked like the last time he saw her, thinking about the word shame and how it dressed itself up so nicely sometimes. Gold embossing, cream paper, it would mean so much. 3 years earlier, Bryce Callahan had been the kind of man nobody noticed. That wasn't self-pity, that was just accuracy. He was 31, working 2 jobs, days at a warehouse on the east side of Columbus, evenings doing security shifts at a downtown hotel, and saving up enough to take 1 class a semester at the community college, cybersecurity fundamentals, which he studied in his car during his lunch breaks, because the hotel was too loud and his apartment was too small. He wasn't handsome in any obvious way. He wasn't charming. He was steady, which is a quality people only appreciate after they've lost it. He met Serena at a mutual friend's birthday party. She was laughing at something someone else had said when he walked in, and the laugh filled the whole room, the kind of laugh that makes everyone within earshot smile, without knowing why. She had dark hair and a glass of red wine and a way of looking at whoever she was talking to like they were the only person in the building. When she turned that look on Bryce, he was absolutely unprepared for it. They dated for 14 months. He met her parents, Howard and Diane, who were polite in the way that wealthy people are polite to someone they've already decided isn't quite right. He ate dinner at their house in Bexley twice, and both times felt like he was being assessed for something he didn't know the criteria for. Serena always laughed that off. "They're just old-fashioned. They'll come around." He believed her because he wanted to. What he didn't know, not then, was that Serena had a plan for her life that had been in place long before she met him. The plan involved a certain kind of house in a certain kind of neighborhood, a certain level of financial stability that 2 jobs and a community college class did not come close to suggesting. The plan was detailed and serious, and she had never fully abandoned it. Even during the 14 months, she let herself be distracted by a steady man with brown eyes who studied in his car. Frederick Langston was not a distraction. Frederick was a corporate attorney whose family had money going back far enough that nobody talked about where it originally came from. He had been in Serena's orbit since college, a persistent option she had kept warm while she figured out what she actually wanted. She figured it out. She ended things with Bryce on a Sunday afternoon, in the parking lot of a Panera Bread, which is the kind of detail that stays with you. She said she cared about him. She said the timing wasn't right. She said she needed someone who was going in the same direction she was, and she said this without any apparent awareness of how brutal it was, because she meant it practically, not cruelly. That was somehow the worst part. There was no villain in her version of the story. He was just a detour. He drove home and sat in his apartment for a long time. Then he got up and went to his evening shift at the hotel because the rent didn't care about his feelings, and neither did Mia's daycare bill. Wait, about Mia. This is the part where the story requires some honest accounting, because later, when people learned about Mia, they sometimes got the timeline wrong and assumed things that weren't true. Mia was not Bryce's biological daughter. She was the daughter of his younger sister, Tess, who had struggled with addiction for most of her adult life, and who had died of an overdose when Mia was 11 months old. There was no father in the picture, or no father who wanted to be. Bryce had taken Mia home from the hospital on a Thursday in November, 3 weeks before Serena broke up with him, and he had not told Serena because he was still figuring out what it meant himself. He was becoming a father at 31, suddenly and completely, and the magnitude of that was something he was processing in pieces. After Serena left, he didn't have time to process anything. He just became a father and kept going. He moved to a smaller apartment to afford better daycare. He cut the community college class, then re-enrolled when Mia started pre-K, and his schedule opened up slightly. He was tired in a way that had no bottom to it, the kind of tired that becomes the background music of your entire life. He learned how to do a 6-year-old's hair, which is not a small thing, and he was not naturally talented at it, and there were many mornings of frustrated tears from both of them before he got the hang of it. He learned which cartoons she loved and which ones gave her nightmares. He learned that she slept better with a fan on, and that she was allergic to tree nuts, and that she had a very specific and non-negotiable opinion about which cup she drank her juice from. He learned her. He had nothing else to do but learn her, and it turned out she was the most interesting person he had ever known. The cybersecurity class became 2 classes, then a certification, then a job offer from a firm downtown called Meridian Shield that specialized in corporate data protection. He took the job. He was good at it in a way that surprised even him. The same steadiness that had made him invisible at parties turned out to be exactly what you needed when you were the person standing between a company's data and someone who wanted to steal it. He moved up quickly. He brought in clients. Within a year, he had been offered a partnership track. He did not tell anyone from his old life about any of this. He didn't have much of an old life left, honestly. He had Mia and his work and his downstairs neighbor, an older woman named Gretchen, who babysat on late nights and pretended she wasn't keeping track of how many times she'd saved him. He was 34 and doing reasonably well. Not wealthy, not impressive by any skyline standard, but solid, genuinely solid. When Mia handed him a thick cream envelope from the mailbox one afternoon and said, "Daddy, it has gold on it," he almost didn't open it. He knew the handwriting on the outer envelope, the looping L's. He stood in the hallway of their building for a full minute before he put it in his jacket pocket and went inside to make Mia's dinner. He read it after she fell asleep. "Serena Whitmore and Frederick Langston request the honor of your presence," and then below that handwritten note. "Hope you can make it. It would mean so much." He sat with it for 2 days before he understood what it was. It wasn't olive branch. It wasn't closure or kindness or any of the things an invitation sometimes is between people who have a history. It was a display. He had figured out enough about how Serena thought to understand that. She wanted him there as a point of comparison, the road not taken, the one she'd been smart enough to leave behind. She wanted her crowd to see the man she could have ended up with, the warehouse worker, the security guard, the guy who studied in his car. He wondered if she had any idea who he was now. He was fairly certain she did not. He sat at his kitchen table for a long time. He thought about declining, which would have been the reasonable thing. He thought about throwing the invitation away, which would have been the wise thing. He thought about Mia asleep down the hall, making small sounds into her pillow the way she did, and he thought about the last few years and everything he had built out of nothing, quietly, with no audience. He called his colleague Derek Haynes, not the Derek from her world, a different one, his head of operations at Meridian Shield, a former military man who had exactly one setting on his face and it was calm, and said he needed a favor on a Saturday in June. Derek said, "What kind of favor?" Bryce said, "The kind where you come with me somewhere and don't explain yourself." Derek said, "Fine." He bought a suit. Not an expensive suit in the way that would make him self-conscious. An expensive suit in the way that fit so well you stopped thinking about the suit and just moved in it. He spent more than he was comfortable with and didn't regret it once he put it on. He picked up Mia from Gretchen's on the morning of the wedding. Mia was coming with him, not as any kind of statement, but because Gretchen had a family thing and because Mia went most places with him, and that was just the shape of his life. He had told Mia they were going to a party. She had asked if there would be cake. He said probably. She said okay. The venue was a converted estate an hour outside Columbus. The kind of place that has a name and a history and a gravel driveway lined with white lanterns. Bryce pulled in with Derek beside him in the front seat and 2 other colleagues from the firm's security division in a second car behind them. Not bodyguards, exactly, though they presented that way, all of them in dark suits and the particular posture of men who had spent years being paid to be watchful. They had come as a personal favor. They knew what kind of day this was. He got out of the car and straightened his jacket and took Mia's hand. She was wearing a yellow dress she had chosen herself and white shoes she had asked to be polished twice that morning. She looked perfect, and she knew it. "Is this the party?" she said. "This is the party. There better be cake," she said. They walked in. The moment Bryce Callahan walked through the doors of the Whitmore-Langston wedding reception, something shifted in the room. It was the kind of shift that has no single cause. It was the suit, the posture, the quiet men who moved with him, the small girl in yellow who was apparently entirely unbothered by any of it. It was that he did not look like a man who had been invited to be humiliated. He looked like a man who had arrived at a place he was entirely entitled to be. and was mildly interested in what would happen next. Serena Whitmore saw him from across the reception hall. She was in her dress, which was spectacular, ivory silk and precisely fitted, and she was mid-conversation with someone from Frederick's family when she saw Bryce come through the door, and something passed across her face that she immediately tried to manage. It was not guilt, exactly. It was recognition, the sudden awareness that she had miscalculated something important. Frederick noticed her expression change and followed her eyes. He looked at the door, at Bryce, and something very different moved across his face. Something that looked, to the people nearest him, like surprise. And then, almost imperceptibly like alarm, Bryce did not approach Serena. He found their assigned table. She had seated him at the back, near the emergency exit, which told him everything he needed to know about her intentions. And he moved Mia and himself closer to the center, to an empty table that had a better view. Derek and the others stationed themselves comfortably around the room. Someone offered Mia a mocktail. She accepted it with great dignity. The ceremony had already happened. This was the reception. People circulated. Some of Serena's friends approached Bryce tentatively, the way people approach something they don't have a name for yet. He was pleasant. He asked people about themselves, which is always a good strategy, and they told him things, because people love to be asked. He learned that Frederick's business interests were the subject of some complicated conversation that had been going on for a while at certain levels of the Columbus financial community. He filed that away. Serena came to him during the cocktail hour. He had been expecting this. She looked older, not badly, just more certain, the way people do when they've made the choices they intended to make. She looked at him with those eyes that had once made him feel like the only person in a room, and he registered it this time as a technique rather than a truth, and felt nothing particular. "Bryce," she said. "You came. You invited me," he said. She looked at Mia, who was at his elbow, holding her mocktail with both hands. "Is this?" She started. "My daughter," he said. "Mia." Mia looked up. "Hi," she said, and went back to her drink. Serena smiled, the smile people put on when they're buying time. "I didn't know you had." 3 years is a long time, he said. A lot changes. She looked around at Derek, at the others, at the general situation, and he could see her reassessing, recalibrating, adding up figures that weren't coming out the way she'd expected. "What do you do now?" she said, finally, and the question was so loaded with everything she was actually asking that he almost smiled. "Data security," he said. "I run operations at Meridian Shield." She knew the name. He could tell from the way her chin moved slightly. Meridian Shield had contracts with 4 of the largest companies in the state. It was not an unknown entity in the Columbus business world. "I didn't know that," she said. "No," he said pleasantly. "You didn't." They stood there for a moment, and the silence between them contained everything that 3 years of diverging lives had to say. And then Mia tugged on his sleeve and said, "Daddy, they have little sandwiches." And he looked down at her and said, "Then let's go get little sandwiches." And he turned and followed his daughter toward the food table, and that was the last real conversation he had with Serena Whitmore. What happened 40 minutes later was not something Bryce had arranged, orchestrated, planned, or in any way caused. He wants to be clear about that because later some people assumed he had known, had brought it all down on Frederick deliberately like a hammer. He had not. He had come to a wedding he had been invited to, wearing a good suit, with a daughter who wanted sandwiches. What happened was this. 3 men in dark jackets came through the side entrance of the estate at approximately 4:15 in the afternoon, during the main course. They were federal agents, Treasury and FBI, as it turned out, a joint task force that had been investigating Frederick Langston for the better part of 18 months. Frederick had been laundering money through a series of real estate investment vehicles, a scheme that was sophisticated enough to have gone undetected for quite some time, except that one of his partners had made a very careless error 9 months ago, and the investigation had cascaded from there. The arrest warrant had been signed that Friday. They arrested him at his own wedding reception, during the salmon course in front of 240 guests and one small girl in a yellow dress, who watched the whole thing from behind her mocktail with enormous eyes. The room did what rooms do when something unimaginable happens. It went very still, and then it erupted. There was noise and movement, and Serena's mother making a sound that no one in that room would forget, and Frederick being walked out between 2 agents while still holding his cloth napkin, and the wedding photographer standing frozen in the corner with his camera at his side, because there is no professional training for this. Bryce sat at his table with Mia in the chair beside him. He did not move immediately. He watched the room the way he had spent 3 years watching systems, looking for the structure underneath the chaos, the points of pressure, the things that would matter in 20 minutes when the shock had passed. Mia leaned over and whispered, "Is that man in trouble?" I think so, he said. What did he do? Something he shouldn't have. She thought about this. Is he going to jail? Probably, he said honestly, because he believed in honest answers with her. She nodded slowly. That's sad, she said, with the particular gravity that 6-year-olds bring to serious things. Even if he did something bad, it's sad. He looked at her for a moment. She was looking at the door where Frederick had been taken out, her brow furrowed, working through something complicated in the way children do. Not the surface of it, but the underneath. He wondered, not for the first time, how she had gotten so much clearer than him. Yeah, he said. It is sad. He stood up, smoothed his jacket, and looked around for Derek, who was already moving toward them through the crowd with the unhurried efficiency that made him so valuable to have around. People were on phones, crying, clustering in urgent groups. A woman near the entrance was explaining to no one in particular that she had always had a bad feeling about Frederick, which was almost certainly not true. Serena was standing near the front of the room, very still, in her ivory silk dress, the guests parting around her the way water parts around something that has stopped moving. She was looking at the door, not at Bryce, at the door. He thought about walking over to her. He thought about what he would say, and what it would accomplish, and what he would want from it, and he concluded honestly that there was nothing to want. He did not wish her worse than what she was already experiencing. He did not wish her well, exactly. He simply had no investment left. It had all been spent a long time ago. He put his hand on Mia's shoulder. You ready to go? Did we have cake? She said. He scanned the room. On a side table, next to an overturned champagne glass, sat the wedding cake. 3 tiers, white fondant roses made of sugar, entirely untouched. He walked over, surveyed it, and cut her a piece himself because no one was serving anything and the entire catering staff had migrated to the lobby to watch the parking lot. He put it on a small plate with a fork and handed it to her. She took a bite. It's good, she pronounced. Good, he said. They left. He thought about it on the drive home. Not Frederick, that was someone else's unraveling, not his. Not Serena's face in the reception hall, though he would think about that a few times in the coming weeks before he stopped. He thought about the invitation and the handwritten note at the bottom and what she had imagined would happen when he walked through that door. She had imagined him smaller. She had imagined the man she left in a Panera parking lot on a Sunday, the one who studied in his car and worked the hotel lobby overnight and counted his money in the doorway of a 2-bedroom apartment. She had imagined showing her crowd the gap between his life and Frederick's, and feeling correct about the choices she had made. What she hadn't imagined was the 3 years in between. The certification, the firm, the partnership track, the mornings of hair braiding and allergy management and cartoon negotiations, Gretchen and the favors she pretended not to count. The particular kind of strength that develops not from having nothing to lose, but from having exactly one thing to lose, and making sure nothing touches it. What she hadn't imagined was Mia, sitting in the passenger seat now with frosting on her chin, telling him at great length about a disagreement she'd had with her friend Poppy over whether dinosaurs could have been friends with horses if they had existed at the same time, which she believed they could have been, and Poppy was wrong about, and had he thought about it because she thought he should think about it. He drove and listened and thought about dinosaurs and horses. I think, he said eventually, that probably some of them could have been friends. Not all of them, but some. She considered this. That's what I said, she said, satisfied. You were right then. I'm usually right, she said, without any arrogance, just as a statement of available evidence. He looked at the road and felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not triumph, nothing as loud as that. Something quieter. The particular peace of a man who has done the thing correctly, not for an audience, but because it was the thing to do. Who has built something real in the time since someone told him he was heading in the wrong direction. Who knows now with complete certainty that the direction he was heading was the only one worth going. Mia fell asleep somewhere around Route 71, mouth slightly open, yellow dress rumpled against the seatbelt. He turned the music down and drove her home. He carried her up to bed without waking her the way he had done 100 times, the routine of it as natural as breathing now. He pulled the blanket up and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her sleep in the way that parents do. Not anxious, just present, just grateful for the specific reality of this particular person in the world. He went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. He thought about the drawer under the takeout menus and went and opened it and took out the invitation. He looked at it one more time, cream paper, gold letters, that handwriting he had once known so well, and then he folded it in half and in half again and dropped it in the recycling bin. The kettle boiled. He made his tea and sat at the kitchen table in the quiet apartment and listened to the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of the building settling around him, and he was not lonely. He had not been lonely in quite some time, though it had taken him a while to understand that. You forget sometimes that a quiet life and an empty life are not the same thing. He had been confusing them for years, and then one day Mia had handed him a piece of paper at the kitchen table and said, "Daddy, I made you this." And it was a drawing of a man and a small girl standing in front of a building that might have been their apartment building or might have been a castle. It was hard to tell, and above them was a sun with a face, and he had looked at it and thought, "This is not nothing. This is not even close to nothing." He finished his tea. He rinsed the cup and turned off the kitchen light and went to check on Mia one more time, because that was what he did. She had rolled over and was facing the wall, one arm stretched out toward the edge of the mattress. He pulled the blanket up again. Outside, somewhere in the city, Frederick Langston was sitting in a holding cell explaining himself to people who had seen every version of the explanation before. Somewhere, Serena Whitmore was in her ivory dress that cost more than Bryce's first month at Meridian Shield, sitting in the back of a car with her parents, rearranging the pieces of a future that had just shifted entirely. Bryce Callahan was asleep by 10:15. He had work in the morning, and Mia had school, and she needed her lunch packed the night before because mornings were chaos, and he was pretty sure they were out of the good granola bars, and he needed to remember to call Gretchen and thank her for the other week. He slept the way people sleep when they've done what they were supposed to do, and built what they were supposed to build, and have somewhere they need to be in the morning. He slept just fine.